approach with different requests or asks from my colleague or from our. So are we seeing that replicated in all of Twitter, for example? And we work with a number of data scientists that can help us sort of analyze and decipher between some of that noise and some of the real granular impact that we're trying to understand for the issues that we're trying to get done.
So what led for you to work at the Gates Foundation? And the same question to you, what led for you to work as a press secretary for Representative Diaz-Balart?
So my story is not linear. As I mentioned, I'm from Pine Bluff, Arkansas. I graduated with about 13 other kids in my senior class, a rural area of Arkansas. But I always knew I wanted to work in politics. And I went over to, when I was in high school, I had a lot of trust in the institution of government and our American institutions. And so I took that belief and that confidence and I went to my local congressman and said, I want to work for you. I want to volunteer. And I was told, no, we only take college students. So sorry, you can't work with us right now. And so I, in my high school confidence, was like, okay, well, just watch me. And so I came up to DC for college, and I did eventually end up working for the Arkansas congressional delegation with that member of Congress later on. So it just was a no that I didn't let stop me, and came full circle much later. But I started my internship on the Hill with then Senator John Kerry, and who was then the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, a topic I'm very much interested in. And turns out so is everyone else in my internship class. So the opportunities to really sit at the table on that front, again, wasn't quite so available or open. And I thought, well, I'm here. There's other areas that I'm interested in. Let me explore what else I can learn while I have this great opportunity. So I ended up getting pulled into the healthcare team, and I worked with then Governor Mitt Romney on implementing what was called Romney Care, which was then going to be the backbone of the Affordable Care Act. When I learned so much through that process about working with constituencies in the state, working with government agencies and congressional offices, but I really wanted to work for my home state. I really wanted to work for a woman who was caring about issues of the Delta where I'm from, and so I ended up moving over to then Senator Blanche Lincoln's office from Arkansas. She ended up losing her seat in 2010 after her vote in favor of the Affordable Care Act. And I decided I was retiring from politics then. I went over to K Street for a brief moment, just pivoted my career a bit, but a pretty similar DC path to a lot of former Hill staffers to then what's next. And while I was there, Mitt Romney jumped into the 2012 campaign against Obama and was starting to go after Obamacare. And I was like, hold on a minute. I was working with your office on what was the backbone for this. So he ended up joining Obama's reelection campaign and went out into rural Appalachia, where I talked a bit about different ideas and different policy priorities for the Obama team and how that was affecting rural America and the geography that I was in. And I'm a country girl from Arkansas, so that messaging from this messenger just resonated differently than I think a lot of other folks. After that success, I came back to DC and decided I wanted to work for a mission-focused organization, but I was retiring from politics again. And I reached out to the Gates Foundation, and at the time, they were realizing they had a lot of great policy wonks, people that really understood policy development, what good policy looks like for the solutions, how you scale that, but they didn't quite have folks with a political acumen to help navigate all of the stickiness that is policy implementation and policy passage. And so I was hired on with that background to help them build out that team where I now lead their political insights work, just helping them navigate what goals we have in terms of good policy, but also what that means to various constituencies, different perspectives, and different angles around what we're trying to get done.
Awesome. So my path is a little different. I honestly did not know that I was ever going to work for a member of Congress. I had no idea what they did. So the way I got my job was through my network. So I'm sure you guys have heard this a million times, but I cannot stress enough how important it is to have a good network. So I found out about my first role in the office through a former coworker at the Taipei Economic and Cultural Office in Miami. This is the de facto Taiwanese consulate general, if you will. And so it turned out that after I had finished an internship here in DC, I had moved back, I needed a new job. And funny enough, she had found out about the position in my boss's office because she was friends with a student at FIU who had announced it during class. So here I am 8 years later. And yeah, it's been quite the journey, but I never in a million years thought I was going to work for a member of Congress. And I've done every role so far from staff assistant, which is welcoming constituents in, and you really learn how to hone in your customer service skills, learning to listen and see what it is that they want. In case none of you guys are familiar with this, but your member of Congress, wherever you guys reside, they help out with anything that has to do at the federal level. So in our district, in our case, a lot of it is often Veterans Affairs, immigration cases, Social Security benefits. So if people have an ongoing application pending, they come to the member's office and they ask for assistance in the member's office intervening and trying to get some movement on the case. So you really also learn the different parts of the government and what each agency does, not just at the federal level, but also at the state and local, even at the county level. So that's kind of something that you learn in the district office more than anything as a staff assistant, and then a caseworker, you really take on those cases full time and you're directly communicating between the constituents and the federal agencies. And you just really learn how to communicate well, not only verbally, but also written. A lot of times constituents reach out because they are frustrated. And so it can be a very overwhelming role, but also you can feel very fulfilled or rewarded by it because you really do see the impact that you can have on a constituent in the district. And so after that, I moved to DC. It's going to be 4 years now that I've been here, coming up on February. And so I came up because opportunity presented itself for me to be his director of operations / press assistant. So director of operations, if you're not familiar with it, They manage the schedule. I thought this was going to be a piece of cake. I'm like, yeah, what's to it? Like, it's a Microsoft Office calendar. Boy, was I in. So there's, especially when you're managing a calendar for a senior member like my boss, it's almost, the way I like to describe it, it's like speed dating at a certain point, because it's like you have so many meeting requests, you learn to prioritize based on his priorities and what matters to his constituents, and as well as his committee. So you really learn how to use that judgment and just prioritize and move quickly to decide and make sure you're responding to everybody, right? Because nothing's worse than not hearing back from somebody who's reached out for even a meeting request. So you learn how to use your judgment and prioritize and make sure everything aligns with your boss's priorities, pretty much. And then I got the opportunity to also handle a bit of press, so a bit of social media during that time, and some press releases that I would help draft. And now I'm doing everything that has to do with press. So I am the only one who handles press in his office. There's a lot of components to that role, and so also another role where you learn to multitask, be flexible, quick on your feet, and you learn to also decide what comes first and what needs to be responded to first, depending on what's going on. And so, social media management, issuing a press release, communicating with your constituents if there's news out there that's perhaps you're getting a lot of calls in the district of people concerned about, for example, their benefits being cut, making sure that you know how to strategize best for your member to communicate with those constituents. It can be anything from sometimes local interviews, getting out there on all the local stations and trying to, spread the message. It could be something as simple as a mass e-newsletter, which is just an email blast to all the constituents who have subscribed. It could be a text message. So yeah, it's that's in a nutshell. There's obviously more to the press secretary role, but yeah, it's just learning to really prioritize and make sure that you are responding to reporters on time and aligning everything with your boss's priorities at the end of the day. So yeah.
And I do want to touch upon how you said you look at social media, releasing press releases. You also monitor media trends, analyze political and media environments. So for both of you, what emerging narratives do you think are having the greatest influence on American mindsets today? And how might those narratives impact public engagement as a whole?
Sure. So one thing I can think of, I think this might fit, the current government shutdown. There's a lot of narratives going on with that, and a way that that's impacting not just people in DC, but American communities across the country is through, for example, we have our service members who will not receive their pay come, I think it's October 15th, next week. We have certain nutritional programs that are funded by the federal government and administered by the state, who I think will run out of funding this Friday. And so those are narratives that you have to be aware of, and you have to be ready to prep your boss to be able to answer these questions and make sure that you're communicating with constituents, letting them know how, in this case, for example, a government shutdown is affecting you and affecting constituents. So, yeah, I think that's one of them.
Yeah, I have a quite a different angle around it. I don't work in comms necessarily, but I do analyze the communication that's happening. And I think the biggest thing that we're wrestling with right now is just that our information system, our media ecosystem has changed, and it continues to evolve and to change. And I think at this moment we're in a pretty fragmented ecosystem, echo chamber, and we don't necessarily echo chamber. We don't necessarily have one solid source of information. And some folks might think that's that's an improvement, that's better. Others might think of that as a really big challenge and an obstacle to think about and try to overcome. And so for us, it's really just trying to figure out how to reach Americans or reach segments of the population where they are, and not trying to force anything down their perspective, but really try to understand where they are, what they're listening to, how they're thinking about very complex issues from a multitude of different angles, but maybe only listening to very similar sources of information or storylines, and how do we think about breaking through that. The other thing I'll just add to that is, in my line of work, we work a lot on foreign aid programs, a lot of global health initiatives, a lot of global development initiatives, and we know that not all of the good news from those programs, the results, the lives saved, the innovation that's happening in the U.S. around research and development that could longitudinally save more lives or save more children under the age of 5, that's not always breaking through in a fragmented media ecosystem. And so how do we think about trying to amplify those stories and work with folks that are within those communities that can really demonstrate how these programs are affecting them in positive ways, and what they're seeing on the front lines, or what they're seeing in Feed the Future labs in the state of Kansas, for example. So really thinking about trying to meet people where they are, and trying to bend the bad news media bias that I think a lot of us sort of get sucked into, myself included, right? And the confirmation and affirmation bias is very human. You know, we want to be right. We want to hear from sources that confirm what we think and believe. And sometimes we know the social media algorithms just sort of manipulate that even more so. So really thinking strategically about that and trying to adapt and be nimble. I mean, both of us have talked about in our careers having to really lean into that nimbleness in a lot of different ways, and having to think more strategically about the media environment and how it's changing and different, and trying to meet that at this time.
I love how you brought up meeting people where they are. Have either of you seen any surprising shifts in which platforms or which channels, whether it's social media, traditional media, podcasts, are most effective for reaching Americans?
So, yeah, I mean, there's so many ways to reach people. I think it all depends on your audience, too, and who you're trying to reach. But yeah, I think I can speak from my role now. A big thing, which I never really thought would become that big, is the podcast. Speaking to the influencers, if you will, call them that way, on social media, who just have a bigger reach. And sometimes those are the people that your constituents are listening to. And so for a member like my boss, who's more senior, he's used to the more traditional media, like, you know, going to the local station back home, or just the major news outlets. You learn that you have to adjust based on the audiences, and again, emerging trends as well, and kind of adjust your way of, or your strategy of reaching your constituents. And so I would say, yeah, like the podcasters is big.
I definitely love a podcast. So yeah, I'm glad that our elected members are thinking around that, because we'd love to see them more on them. But for us, we had this question around, where are people getting in this fragmented system? Where are people turning to? So we did a big research project around how people are gathering information. And the things that surprised me were quite plentiful in that research project. But the biggest one was, I think, I'm going to age myself, but as someone, I'm DC based now. I don't drive my car. I'm hardly ever in it. and I certainly don't listen to talk radio, but a huge portion of our population really turns to talk radio still for information and perspective and attitudes. And it just was one of those things. Like, I moved out of my parents' home, haven't really tuned into that in a long time, and I was like, oh yeah, this still exists. So knowing that, to your point, where your audiences are going to or turning to is really critical to research and understand if you're trying to reach them where they are. The other piece that surprised me from that research project was that I think now 1 in 4 Americans turn to YouTube for news, not just like pop girly content or, true crime. They're going to it for news. And it was one of those things that reading that was really informative for us and made us think strategically about how we're engaging various communicators and think differently about those communication tactics.
Now, based on those trends, how do you both research and formulate your messaging for the public, especially when it comes to sensitive topics?
I'll start here. We do a number of research projects all over the year. I really start with what the data tells me. Again, I mentioned confirmation bias is very human. I don't try to do research to tell me what I want to see. I really dive into the data and I try to understand what considerations we need to be thinking about as we're thinking about our own communication tactics.
Yeah, and for me, especially on the Hill, my first podcast actually that I listen to is The Daily Punch. Do any of you guys listen to that? Anybody familiar? Yeah. If you want to work on the Hill or if you really want to know what's going on, they really know what's going on, especially the dynamics between the members, which is very important to understand. A lot of what's going on behind the scenes. So that's my first way where I start my day, and I try to see what the main discussions are surrounded. And then I read, because my boss is subcommittee chairman of the National Security and Department of State subcommittee. He covers a lot of foreign affairs topics. So for me, it's very important to become knowledgeable on certain issues. Obviously, I can't be an expert yet on everything going on in the world, but the Congressional Research Service that's provided to House staffers is a very good resource. It's nonpartisan and it's just the facts, and it can give you a really good summary on honestly everything. They do research on everything from defense sales, for example, between the United States and Taiwan, to a certain issue going on in the Middle East. So that's usually a really good resource. Obviously, the big news outlets. And I think it's just a matter of, because you're right, there's a lot of bias. And I think it's important to just use those critical thinking skills and just make sure that you're analyzing those headlines and see if they're very skewed. Because at the end of the day, all you want are the facts, so that you can be better informed for yourself, whether you're preparing talking points or you're going to draft a statement on something, or whether you have to brief your boss on a certain current event or breaking news. And so, yeah, it's just a matter of, I think, using a lot of resources. For me, in my role, it's a lot of the news outlets. I try to read both conservative and Democratic newspapers or online. I try to read that, and I just try to inform myself in a way that I just have the facts. So yeah, that's how I gather my information.
I think it's really interesting that you both mentioned bias, because our current media landscape today is polarizing at best, divisive at worst. So how can institutions like the Gates Foundations and political offices like Representative Diaz-Balart, how can they effectively foster trust and encourage nuanced understanding among audiences who are exposed to vastly different forms of media?
It's a great question, and I'm not just doing that to buy time, like the book said, but it's a really great question, and it's a question that has been evergreen for the Gates Foundation. I think this goes back again to what we both talked about earlier, is knowing the audience that you're communicating towards. For me, I think about it's not always, in some cases, Bill Gates is the right spokesperson to talk to maybe Representative Diaz-Balart, or if we're trying to reach a different audience, maybe it's really not no one from the Gates Foundation, no one from Seattle, no one from Washington, D.C. It really might be the frontline worker that has delivered vaccines in sub-Saharan Africa. Or it might be the researcher at, again, Feed the Future Innovation Lab that just had a huge scientific breakthrough that's going to break through in terms of nutrition and starvation with agricultural research. Or it could be, the teachers in Florida from the PTA that is a partner of the Gates Foundation. It really might just be those frontline individuals that can speak to their direct communities and share their experiences or their perspective and reach different audiences than Megan McCafferty from the Gates Foundation.
Yeah, and then, yeah, you're right. It really just depends on your audience. For us, our most important audience are our constituents. So, being transparent, being accessible, being out there in the community is very important for my member to be able to have that open line of communication with his constituents. And sometimes that means doing teletown halls. This is where will call a bunch of constituents and they can ask any question they want and he will speak to them for like about an hour and a half. So we'll do that throughout the year. We'll send out the e-newsletters. We'll do outreach hours where we'll go to different parts of our district, especially the more rural parts. And sometimes the member will drop in during those office outreach hours. And it's just a good way for him to be able to catch up with constituents who oftentimes, it's funny, we get these callers who are upset because they're seeing something on the news. And they're just running with that. And then whenever he does meet with people, with constituents back home, and he's able to just have a conversation with them, it's incredible how in the first 15 minutes, he's able to just calm the person down and really have a discussion on whatever issue they may be concerned about, or that they've heard something about that might not necessarily be true. So yeah, it just depends on your audience and being transparent, communicating his wins. For me, for my job especially is how do I simplify what my member does? He works on appropriations. Nobody really knows what that is or cares about, right? So it's learning how to simplify that message and all the good work that comes out of that, the federal funding he's able to bring back home. And for me to be able to highlight that and let constituents know how that is affecting their community back home, or even just the world, because we have to worry about national security too. And so, again, I'll mention it again, but press releases, social media, newsletters, text messages, sometimes just a short video, and really just the member really does. He's not a big, he doesn't love to be out there on the news that much. But he really loves to do a lot of things behind the scenes and just be there with constituents and talking to them. And I think that's what's helped him. He's been in Congress now, I think, for 22 years. And not to make it political, obviously, but he's a Republican in a district that's, I think, only 36% Republican. So I think that speaks to how well he is able to communicate with people and connect with them and just stay in touch. And yeah.
That's great. And really bring it back home to what matters to those folks. Yeah.
Awesome. Now, all of our DC interns have been given the book Think Faster, Talk Smarter. Now, the book aims to help people become more confident and clear and more effective when they have to speak under pressure and on the spot. So, in what ways do you both think on your feet when crafting messages and being on top of multiple topics, especially in the news cycle?
Yeah, so for me, I think what's helped me is I keep all of his talking points on various issues. So I'm able to always just kind of refer to that, especially if I'm like stuck when I have to draft a statement or a tweet or I have to brief him on an issue. It's very helpful for me to be able to go to those talking points because I already learn how he likes to speak, what words he likes to use, the tone, depending on the issue. And yeah, that just helps me be able to think quickly on my feet. And you start to get better and you rely on them less and less as you become more familiarized with his priorities and the issues as well. But yeah, it's that. And then being confident in yourself at the end of the day, it's really just fake it till you make it. I never knew I was going to end up as the press secretary for a senior member of Congress. And here I am almost 2 years in the role. And I'm enjoying it. And at first it was very difficult and challenging, but if you have the right attitude and you're willing to learn and just take notes, and it's just practice and it's just really putting yourself out there at the end of the day and just trying to talk and yeah, until eventually things become more natural. So yeah.
Yeah, I loved the book. I definitely practice active listening, so I really encourage everyone to do that as well. We also at the foundation regularly recycle yes and, right? That improv tactic of acknowledging and building off of what's been brought to the table and providing your perspective around it. And then I don't know if anyone tried the gift someone a box practice in the book, but that's one that I use regularly. And it's really around you give someone an empty box, and then they open it up and tell you what's in it. And I did it with my boyfriend, and he was like, some mushroom poisonous gas that I have no idea what it is, no idea what it was. But what I was able to do was acknowledge what he said and bring it back to something that we had bonded over with the TV show about the mushrooms that like zombify people or whatever. But I practice that tactic all the time in my line of work, both currently, but also in previous life when I was doing political operations. You really want to be able to acknowledge people with what you're trying to communicate, meet them where they are. And if you're not quite sure, you're not an expert on mushroom poison gas, right? Bring it back to something that you are familiar with and talk about that, and then bring it back home to centralize. The other thing I'll just say on that is you can always ask someone else a question to talk about themselves, and they'll probably engage around that because that's something I like to do. I love to talk about myself and love to be able to throw it back and learn more about the person that I'm communicating with. And then you can just get a lot more content to try to weave that thread a bit more fluidly and build that connective tissue to what you're trying to talk about or communicate.
Great. And one final question, because communications is very stressful. From this entire panel, we can kind of surmise that it's very stressful, very fast-paced. So what is your favorite way to decompress? What, maybe a favorite book you like to read, maybe a movie you like to watch?
So for me, it's exercise. I can't stress enough.
Me too.
Yes. I can't live without it. I don't always like doing it. But I love running. I've done 2 half marathons. Yay. Hopefully, hopefully I would love to train for a full marathon, but I don't know if I'm there yet. But running is my go-to, and it really keeps me grounded, and I love to do it in the morning, and it just makes me start my day off right. So that's one way I decompress.
It releases such good juices for your brain health too, and your serotonin levels for sure. That's one for me too. I spent a lot of my 20s really trying to understand what brings me joy in the world, and so I still use that today. It's almost always about trying to learn more about the world that I'm in, and so that could be going to a live concert, hearing an artist speak about their own perspective and their own experience, and like experiencing the world through them. I also love to travel. I also love to taste new recipes. The other thing, I really like Amy Poehler's Good Hang. It's no negativity. It is like a good brain break. And I love to laugh, so that one brings me a lot of joy. And then I have a bulldog at home that just is pure serotonin as well. So, yeah.
All right, now I'd like to throw it to our audience. If anyone has any questions for these two wonderful panelists, please raise your hand. Or
Thank you very much, first of all, for being here. My name is Nicholas, and although I'm not an FIU and go to UF, it has been a pleasure to be here and hearing both your perspectives. My question is, throughout your career, what has been the most challenging moment that you have front of and that you have been able to, work towards a solution?
Yeah, for me, one of the most challenging ones was deciding to move up here and work out of DC and on Capitol Hill, which is a completely different animal that you can't just prepare for in school. So that was challenging, learning the house rules, the voting procedures, and it's like, what is going on? And then trying to manage the schedule. So that all was very new to me and very intimidating in the beginning. But again, with a positive attitude, going in, taking notes, and just wanting to learn and being present and just being there, trying to do your best, I think goes a long way. And so, yeah, that's one way that I overcame that challenge.
Yeah, and for me, listen, I retired from politics in 2010 when I thought it was toxic, and I still sort of work in politics. And I think one of the hardest experiences for me was when my boss at that time took a very hard vote with our full support, knowing that the cost would be very great personally, but we believed in what it would do for the people that we were trying to serve. And so that was a very hard loss, but really built a lot of resilience and adaptability, and just trying to continue on and take another step forward in a new direction, which, as I mentioned early on in my career, had a lot of no's, a lot of shut doors, but that really taught me a lot about being adaptable and nimble. And I think both of us have demonstrated how critical that skill set is in surviving DC and surviving politics and surviving communications. And so being able to pick yourself back up and march on forward, I think, is something that I encourage everyone to remember when they're faced with something that feels paralyzing or feels like a shut door.
Thank you.
Great question.
anyone else?
Yeah, hi. So my name is Natalia. I intern at Senator Ashley Moody's office along with Nicolas. I do go to FIU. And my question is regarding, so you were talking about how you were in high school and you just got like a flat out no, and then you were explaining that you kind of just jumped into being press secretary. I guess my question would kind of be regarding imposter syndrome and kind of like getting through that and being like, no, I actually do belong here. And you said it yourself, you're like, no, I'll show you in a couple of years, right? I really agree with that, and I really relate to that. So if you can just explain a little bit more about your thought process behind that.
For me, politics, no imposter syndrome ever, but philanthropy, a bit of it, because a very different career pathway, very different pace and energy, and I work with a lot of folks that have full-on doctorates, and I do not. So I think, again, realizing that the confidence is important, and believing in yourself and knowing who you are, and that you bring a different perspective which maybe is absent from that table, and no one might elevate it because everyone is being what they are, but you have a different perspective to try to improve what you're all trying to get done. I really lean into that with my work. No, I don't have anyone else on my team that is from Arkansas. I don't have anyone else from my team that had such a small school or a different upbringing. And Arkansas is one of the most impoverished states, but that's actually, that background is so beneficial to bring forth to an institution that might not always hear those angles or consider that diverse point of view.
Yeah, and I know exactly what you're talking about because when I first got up here, I had major imposter syndrome and I was like, I don't belong here. What am I doing? But something that Megan mentioned, just being there and trying to learn, having that right attitude, eventually you do build resiliency and learning what perspective you also might bring to the table, learning what strengths you have. When I came up and was director of operations, not only did I have to manage the schedule, I had to make sure the office was always organized because people are coming in for meetings and the members there. In addition to learning the House floor procedures, or learning the voting schedule at least, right? And so I guess in that example or in that role, I know that I'm a very organized person. So while it took me a while to learn the voting schedule and what everything meant, the terms they use, it was going to take me a while. I took notes, but I knew my strengths were I'm highly organized. And so that's something that I noticed the office was lacking, and it was very simple. It was just making sure we had all the supplies always there, easily refillable, whether it's, the kitchen supplies or the office supplies, the paper, pens, pencils, binders. And I was able to slowly build my confidence and learn other things once I got that down. And I think my team also, it's something very small, but it was a strength that I knew I had and something I saw that was lacking in my office. And I was able to kind of bring that and make things better. And I saw my team really appreciated that, which made me feel better as well, made me feel valued. And yeah, it's just with time, it makes you feel more confident to just know that you can master skills as you go along. And just, giving yourself grace is very important. Everybody's learning the same thing as you. Don't think that just because somebody's been there longer, they know everything. They may know a lot, but they also started where you were one day. So just making sure that you have that grace with yourself, I think, is very important.
Definitely. And no, it's going to be bumpy, and that's okay. Yeah.
I see that the young man in the blue shirt had his hand up.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Alex. I'm currently interning for the Foundation for Defensive Democracies, and I have a question about what messaging resonates with the country at large. It seems like both parties are really moving more toward populist movements, and it's kind of a reductive term, but the Republicans seem to only get excited about Trump. Democrats are increasingly only getting excited about candidates like Zoran and AOC and Bernie. And I'm curious whether you think that this populist messaging is here to stay, if it's a phase, if we're actually looking at like sort of a long-term reform in the two sides of the political spectrum.
But I think a yes to all of them. I do think the way we approach it is maybe blind optimism, that there is still a way to demonstrate. I'll lean in on the America first. It is not America only. Maybe some have a different perspective around that. But as we think about things like foreign aid, it doesn't serve only recipient countries, right? It's not only about those other countries. It also, as I mentioned time and again, Feed the Future innovation labs that are really doing groundbreaking work in the U.S. But that's sort of absent from a lot of the conversation that is talking about domestic issues and not making that connection that these policies are complex and have impacts both internationally and domestically. So I think there's a way to build some of that connective tissue and try to demonstrate, again, meeting audiences where they are, maybe not so much so on the populism front, but really trying to figure out what they're trying to see from their government, what they're trying to see from these programs, where their direct needs are, and is there a place where our priorities serve that, and can we talk about that in addition to talking about our other issues?
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with Megan, and I'll add on to that. My boss oversees the committee that handles foreign affairs. Very unpopular nowadays. So how do we sell that message, right? So again, audience and knowing how to decipher those key words that are important to constituents, to the American public. So for us, for example, focusing on saving American taxpayer dollars, prioritizing U.S. national security, and tailoring your message in a way where, at least for my boss, fulfilling his committee responsibilities, but also addressing the concerns of his constituents and what resonates best with them back home. And for us, making sure that we're also, because at the end of the day, we're also communicating with the administration. So making sure that we are also communicating in a way that is true to my boss's tone, but also is appealing to the administration's agenda to a certain degree. So yeah, that's what I would add.
The other thing about that, and I'm speaking from Megan McCafferty, not the Gates Foundation, but I just believe the political pendulum always swings, and we are still swinging, and it is never static. And so I just think the best thing to do is to pick and choose the battles that you want to fight, however you define it for your priorities, your perspective, and having a sort of in the work life that can be a bit tense, right? But on your personal livelihood, just figuring out how long you can wait or where you need to push back and follow through on what your heart and soul and brain tell you to do.
Yeah, either of you.
My name is Danny Richard. I'm a intern with the American Public Transportation Association. My question is actually a two-part question. In either of your positions, what was the most difficult part in working with the media, and what strategies have you come up with to actually address those difficulties?
I have many, but let me think about that real quick.
Yeah, I have none. I don't work in communications. But what I will say is, from the Insights perspective, being honest about the challenges that we see when we're trying to get a story in the media and it's just not breaking through. I think one of the biggest challenges is obviously you want to engage with the media to try to get news coverage or a podcast that's talking about different voices around a specific angle. But how far that actually lands in the American public, I think that sort of second piece is really the challenge that we're trying to figure out. And so there are a couple different ways, and we have a whole communications team that really is trying to get their arms around different solutions and tactics around that. But from an advocacy perspective, it's really, if we're ultimately trying to reach people where they are, then again, just meet them where they are. Maybe not through the media, maybe not through the national media. Maybe we need to think more about regional media or local media and talking about bringing in voices from the ground that are impacted and trying to break through in a different type of approach than maybe what worked 5 years ago. So I think we're trying to figure it out still, and learning in real time at the moment.
Yeah, and for me, one example I can provide you that I'm still currently dealing with, and my office as a team, we're still trying to come up with the best way to improve the situation. But there's a local paper back home that's very important to our readers, our constituents, that for years has not, in our view, fairly reported on my boss throughout the years. That's been an ongoing thing now for, I would say, about 2 years that we've been dealing with. And so what we've tried to do is obviously not shut the doors on that outlet because we recognize their value and their importance. But it's, for us, what we're trying to do is establish a better working relationship, not just with the editors, but with the reporters, whether they're here in DC or back home. And so that's been a challenge, but it's something that's still ongoing. But yeah, that's an example that I can provide to you where it's been difficult with the media.
I appreciate your answer. Thank you.
And we'll take one last question. Yeah.
I had just a quick question about communications, and I think in other media types to make it more relevant. You've talked about, I know you talked about, has there been different types of appeals that have changed over time that you've had to make to people in your respective professional capacities? Like some, like I know we were talking about some probably about moral appeals. Is that like fading off? Is it more just kind of different ways you have to sell things? Or, I mean, sell is I hope you can understand.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I think for us, again, it's always about ultimately who we're trying to reach. And Americans are exhausted right now. They are overwhelmed with issues. And so talking about unpopular issues is very hard to really build momentum around. But if you can talk about it with a different messaging angle and maybe testing that out with the audience that you're trying to serve or to reach and understand, does this how we want to maybe talk about this, does this resonate with you, or do you have immediate backlash to that? And so for us, from the researching side, we really want to understand how we can communicate better and try to message more appropriately to demonstrate the proof points that we know are there, but maybe we have assumptions around. And so really understanding if ultimately we're trying to reach suburban mamas, what are they looking for right now? What are the problems that they're wrestling with? Do our issues solve some of those problems? Can we talk about that? If we think we can, let's test it out and do some focus groups or do some quantitative surveys and understand what the data actually tells us around that. And if the data comes back and says, no, actually your assumption is wrong, okay, let's go back to the table, go back to the drawing table and figure out a different approach around this and really figure out if that's even the right play for us to work through, or if we might want to think about maybe it is better for our priorities if we're quiet, if we don't blow up the issue, right? There's something strategic in that as well.
Yeah, and I would just add, at the end of the day, being honest and just trying to just communicate in a way that's effective to your constituents or to whoever your audience is. And there's a lot of very controversial issues going on right now that affect, for example, my member back home, and there's been a lot of backlash. So a lot of moral questions that he's had to deal with in interviews or even with constituents. And really, I guess my best way to answer this is just, tone it down back to basics. We don't do as much research, but he tries to be very honest, and we try to choose the best, strategize in using the best medium of communication to reach our constituents if there's something that's become big back home in the district that's affecting them.
thank you all for your wonderful questions. Again, I would like to thank all of you for coming. Can we get a round of applause for our two amazing panelists?
Questions.